Here at BizVision's Meet the Leader, we're not just focused on talking to leaders themselves, but also leaders who coach leaders. And today, I've got a real treat for you. Someone who's recognized globally for his leadership knowledge, his mentoring skills, and his C-suite or executive suite expertise. So come fly with me across the pond to New York and meet the CEO of the renowned McGehrin Group. Welcome, George McGehrin.
Malcolm, it's good to see you. It's always good to catch up with you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Lovely to talk to you. Lovely to meet you. So tell me about yourself and particularly about the McGehrin Group.
Right. So I have two main businesses, right? One is an executive placement group. So we work with primarily, I would say, C-suite folks who are in the range from, let's say, $300,000 a year to about $4 or $5 million. So it's an interesting group. Most are working for global companies. So that's a 30-person company. It's about an 8-figure business. The second business is an executive branding business where we help the same types of people and just help them with their CV development, their executive development, their board CVs, and LinkedIn profiles. So that's kind of what we're up to. The recruiting business that I have now, which is now 20 years old, it started when I was literally in the unemployment line, right? So I was just, I was working for a German company, originally from New York, was living in Miami, and I found myself without a job. And I decided, quite frankly, never, ever again to be in a situation where if broken, unemployed, and poor, that it was my fault. So I decided to, so I started little by little, I started a recruiting business, and it's grown to what we have today. So we have clients that range from every industry, geography, as well as sort of revenue stream all around the world. It's been a good run. It's been a very good run.
But I was fascinated in reading about you. You've achieved so much since that inspiration of 2000, or you say, starting your business from literally nothing right there. So what was that takeoff moment of growth? Suddenly, where did it come from? What happened? There's always just that moment, isn't there, when you go, wow.
Right. And I think the idea of having a business or being an entrepreneur or starting something, it sounds much sexier than it is, right? It's especially now we've got Instagram, we've got all of these folks that are, they're just embellishing how things are working. I was a solopreneur, let's say, for the first 2 or 3 years. And the first thing that changed was I think I changed who I was involved with. And I started to network and just meet other folks who had businesses. And the first piece of advice that I'd ever received, I think that was valid, was, George, if you look at any successful company, they have a team behind them.
Yeah.
And you need to, and even if you can't financially afford to do it, you need to take the dive, right? You need to take the leap of faith and hire 1 or 2 people. And that's what I did. That was the first piece that really changed for me.
Right.
And I realized that, you only have 24 hours a day. And let's say you're awake 16, 17 hours. You need to be able to multiply yourself. But that was the first lesson. The second lesson I learned, which I think the importance of coaches, is that if you, by depending upon, on coaches or other folks that really know what they're doing, you really, you can buy time, and you can buy. Yeah, you can buy 20 years of mistakes, right?
Yeah, I know.
And you can save so much time in that aspect, right? So I started to really think about what were some of the doubts or questions or process problems that I might have, and I started asking other people. Now they call it, I guess now it's sort of a mastermind, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, it wasn't really a thing, right? Yeah. There wasn't, but it was sort of when I realized the importance of some mastermind like group. That was sort of the pivot point for me. It's a great question because a lot of people never get to that. They never get they stay, sort of solo, and it's a disaster. It's a recipe for disaster as well. You really only have 16, 17 hours in a day, right? You need to figure out how to duplicate and replicate and let other people execute while you work on your vision.
I'm with you. Now, both our countries are experiencing unprecedented times at the moment, with phrases like the new normal being touted. That likely means change. What do you think the new leaders of tomorrow will be like? And what new skills will they have or will need to have?
Well, I think the first thing we see is, and it's proven in lots of different. I think the social media craze is kind of it's an interesting. I don't know if you had seen today, but at least here in the United States, Trump had passed some executive leader. It was a sort of executive law about Twitter and Facebook and trying to control some of the social media companies.
No
But
way.
I think the politicians in general and leaders, I think being more savvy to the social media landscape, right, and then the influence that can create. The second thing, and because I'm focused on the work sort of landscape, I think it's going to be very interesting to be able to hire and find talent. And I think the fact that somebody from Monday to Friday walks into an office, I think that's going to change drastically, right? And to be fair, I sometimes wonder, and I sometimes fear this for first world countries. I mean, if you're in London and you don't need to hire somebody, if let's say that somebody's going to work virtually, I mean, the question is, why would you hire somebody from Britain if you can get somebody maybe from a different country, and they're going to work, and virtually they're working anyway? I think there might be some of that shock, which I really don't believe that politicians are ready for that yet. There's lots of, there's so much great talent outside of the UK, outside of the United States, outside of just Europe. I don't think the politicians are ready for that piece yet. When you've got the virtual worker, but if you can pay somebody £80,000 or somebody or £30,000, I think that's going to be a big shift, especially, and it will be justified, right? It will be justified with this whole the virtual living space that we're now in.
Yeah. But surely those leaders then will need remote leadership skills. It's a lot different, And I mean, you're a great presenter, but I've been interviewing, 30, 40 CEOs and MDs over the last couple of weeks there, and not many are good communicators on something like this.
Right. I think it's a practice. I mean, I by the way, thank you for the compliment. I don't feel like I'm a great presenter, but I appreciate the compliment. I think it's a practiced skill set, but I think the problem is the connection, right? It's the face to face that sitting there, and it's just, I think that's going to be a difficult problem. And some of those leaders, and you've met some of these folks, you see them on TV, and they have one sort of presence, and then you see them physically in front of you, and it's a different. There's almost like this. It's just like the sainthood around them to some extent. They have a glow, right? Yeah. And I think they'll need to learn how to take that glow, in person and put it on camera. But it's definitely a changing world. But I mean, I think that's how countries and folks, sort of, I think that's how we advance. The educational system for me will be very interesting. I think, it's just kids, their concept of going to university physically will probably be alien, right?
Yeah, too true. Yeah.
And some people, I'm someone that needs to be there physically and to learn. I'm not a great, online learner. So I think there's going to be a disconnect in the educational part as well.
Yeah, but I see the skills that leaders, doing a briefing to shareholders, stakeholders, even remote boardrooms are going to be all the norm for a good few years.
Well, this is true. I think a lot of the things you see obviously are scripted and they're pre-scripted. So there's that. But there's also the non-scripted part of this virtual world we live in.
Yeah.
But there's a benefit. I mean, Malcolm, 20 years ago, everything was very localized, right? Like, so, for example, both of us speaking today, 20 years ago, this would have not been possible.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a wonderful thing, right? It's a wonderful thing to be able to travel. And you mentioned sort of, all the places you were today, right?
Yes,
virtually. Yes. That's a wonderful thing to experience. And, I think in the next 2 weeks, I've been a guest on 25 or 30 podcasts as of late, and I'll be on another 80 or 90 by the time 2020 is over. I have there's a podcast next week where the gentleman's in Australia, right? And those are wonderful experiences, and those are relationships that wouldn't have happened if not for 2020, right?
Yeah. So you're a successful C-suite recruiter. For tomorrow's candidates, where will you focus your probing on their capability?
Oh, difficult question. I mean, I think at the end of the day, everything comes down to cultural fit. A lot of times,
Yeah.
it's cultural fit. It's people that show up prepared. Cultural fit is a big deal, right? Culture fit,
Yeah.
and you know this. You could be. You see this actually with some of the footballers, right? You have talented, people, and but their work ethic maybe not. Maybe it's not.
Yeah.
It's not sort of or maybe they just don't. They don't fit with the club that they're in. I think culture fit for us is one of the biggest things that we look at.
Yeah.
Everyone has sort of soft skills. They have sort of a soft skill set. A soft skill set. But the cultural piece, I think that's something that really won't go out of style. And it's good leaders are the ones that listen. They're the ones that assess, and they're able to build up people and not sort of tear them down. And you see that over and over and over.
Yeah.
And obviously with the experience, there's that obviously portion of that. But the cultural leadership and how they can scale, especially the market is so much smaller than it was, years ago. Right. So, we do business globally, and you're doing, business globally now. I think the ones that really realize that, the ones that see that as a normal part of day to day, those are the ones that are going to do really well.
Yeah. Well, talking about global, is there such a thing as a skilled global executive? Or do you think the future trend will be, should we say, more partisan so that a deeper grounding and greater resilience is achieved?
So, I mean, I guess, would that be an example of sort of we would call it so I think if someone's stuck in sort of a very localized market or just, and that even goes to sort of a one product, sort of, niche. I think that there's so much access to great talent. There's so much access to great knowledge, to just have that at a localized, sort of environment. I think it's an issue. And I think it would be, I think it's a disadvantage for most people.
Yeah.
So we on our team, we have 30 people, right? We have a portion of people that live here in the United States. A portion of folks are in South America. We've got people that live in Europe. That's sort of a more of a global hiring mindset. And I think that's going to be an important part for somebody later on. I mean, we're in a different, 2020. I'm curious to see how things will be in 2030, right?
we just step ahead, should we? Take the time shift, yeah. Time Lord, okay. So how important do you think it is that an executive or aspiring executive develops a strong personal brand? If they do, are they then perceived as being less committed to their own company and more benefit to the business? It's a fine balance in some case. How should they go about building such a brand? And where are the no-go areas of such brand building?
Right. So it's and this is a fine line that executives that I deal with ask me that quite often. I'm completely convinced that by having a strong personal brand, you're at the same time building up the professional, the team. So the organization that you're running, the team that you're running, you're indirectly helping that, sort of that part of the equation. At the end of the day, people work for people, right? And Malcolm, let's say that there was an opportunity and you wanted to hire me. The first thing I would do would be go on Google, and then all of this material shows up online, and I would kind of I would sort of quote unquote check out Malcolm Gallagher, and then I would make a decision if it made sense for me to maybe take a meeting or not. But that's you can also you have to be very careful with a personal brand as well. And you talk about that fine line. I really believe that, and this is a difference I would say that Europeans have versus obviously Americans, right? I think as a whole, we're probably a little more open about self-promotion.
Yeah.
And I think from a business standpoint, it's a disadvantage for some, and it depends on sort of who's selling to who. But you have to be aware of that that cultural shift between, a European or an American and who you're doing business with. But it's the personal brand, I would say, is 110% important for the professional brand. Right.
Excellent. Right. Gotcha.
It's without question important. Everybody that's ever worked with our group and my team, they'll say, I would say 50, half the time they'll say, George, before I decided to work with you, or before we decided to sign on with your team, we obviously did some research, and this is what we found, and okay, it was great, it's you have to be very conscious of the personal brand, because that feeds the professional brand.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So what do you think are the three key skills that executives need to develop now and urgently if they're to achieve personal and or business growth?
So I would say number one, they have to listen, which is a normal.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear that a lot.
2 ears, 1 mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. Or when you're a kid, and your father would tell you to sort of. I think it's good to listen. I think listening skills.
Yeah.
Especially since a lot of the workforce is not. They're not coming into the office. There's not a lot of that interaction. That you need to be able to listen and dig. Right. I would say that's the first piece. The second part of the leadership, I would say, I think at least initially, I mean, we're obviously we're in May. I think to some extent you have to be somewhat understanding about the current environment. There are some people that are just uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with physically being in an environment, right?
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is we represent a lot of clients that are very large, that products that you use, for example, today, and there are some of our clients, and they're readjusting to the sort of the 80-20 rule, and seeing because of the environment, because of the environment that we're in and that we will be in with the consumer, they're focusing on the things that really matter and sell versus just having 50,000 products. So I think you're going to see that 80-20 rule implemented a little more, where instead of maybe having 15 or 20 products, you're going to see them narrowed down. I mean, Apple does a great job of that, right? Apple, you can really only buy 4 or 5 things, and then have their services and everything else. But you go to the store, there's only 4 or 5 things you can really buy. I think you're going to see more of that.
It's frightening, isn't it, that the Pareto's law of 80-20 all those years ago, I think, was it 15 or 1600s or maybe earlier, is still so relevant, isn't it? Okay. Research by Gartner, recent research by Gartner, shows that CEOs only make 15% of their decisions based on HR input. Do you think this needs to change, and why?
I'm surprised it's that high. I'm actually surprised it's that high. I'm assuming the number is probably higher than realistically. The truth. I'm assuming the truthful number is probably less than that. A lot of times, I mean, HR adds. I think the problem with that question is there's 2 types of HR folks, right? There's 2 types of HR individuals. There's sort of the administrative type. Yeah. And then there's the chess player strategist.
Yes.
I would argue that the disconnect is not HR in itself. The disconnect of that 15% or the 85% that they didn't consult would be the actual leader they have in place, right? So maybe it kind of begs you to ask the question, if I'm not really relying on, there's an 85% chance I'm not relying on this one person. Maybe I need to change the shift of who's on my team.
Yeah.
And this is just, I mean, you're a marketing expert. Sometimes I think it's the perception of HR folks that maybe they don't have a strong, they're not as savvy on a business, how to scale a business as like a CFO or CMO or a CIO. But there are so many talented HR folks out there. But in general, the ones that are really talented are the strategic, chess playing, let's talk, and they're more pseudo COOs, right, or CEOs. Yeah. But I would argue, that's probably the disconnect there. It's probably the person they have on their team, probably lacks that COO kind of skill set.
Just as an aside issue there, I was just reading Harvard Review this last few days. I get the free version, by the way. Don't.
Okay. So, do you recommend the free version?
Over the free version always, all the time. Yeah. But what they were saying is now's the right time to go talent seeking. because there's lots of people, good talent, wandering around.
100% agree. And you have a lot of people that are now, there are a lot of people that their whole lives they had worked, they had a schedule,
Yeah.
and they literally worked, a certain, and that was they're used to, and now they've been home for 3 months or 2 months.
Yeah.
And they say, this is kind of this is a neat little setup we have here. Maybe I'll look for something differently, right?
Yeah.
And
the wife's saying, "Oh no."
Right. Well, I'll tell you our story. We have I built up my business from 2000 to about 2008 to about 50 people.
Right.
All of our clients. So 2008, 2009, all of our clients were banks, right? So financial service sector.
Yeah.
We had in one day. So we had 2 or 3 offices in one day, like a 48-hour period. I had it was Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBS, a bank called Wachovia, who's now Wells Fargo. Call me and say, "Hey, George, the party's over." Right.
Right.
So I went from 50 people back to 0. I had to totally rebuild my business.
Wow.
And it was sort of like it was starting again.
Yeah.
And I made up a couple of, and that was a shift as well for me. And this is related to your question. It was such a traumatic experience for me. Right. That was my version of sort of coronavirus. But I decided, if we were to do it again, how would I do it? Right. And I was in a situation where I could do it again. And I decided, okay, no more office rentals, right? I'm going to have everybody in my team will now be work remotely, virtually. Back then, it wasn't really a thing. But I decided instead of investing in, 10-year office leases, I decided to invest in systems, right? And technology. And so that was a shift. But I think today's workforce, you're going to see that. There's a lot of people that say, listen, you know what? Maybe working from home is not a bad thing. And maybe if I make a little less money and there's less commute and I have better quality of life, there are a lot of people that feel that way. I think it's forever changed how people see.
Yeah.
And from a buying, I'm from a buying aspect, right? I don't know if you've mentally thought about your buying habits from before and how they will have changed. But I personally can tell you, I'm probably going to be a different consumer than I was.
I won't change because I don't have access to money. My wife has all of that.
Well, they say happy wife, happy life, right?
Yes, I've got that. But in your experience in dealing with these C-suites or executive suites, as we call in the UK, or boardrooms, what are the key blocks to achieving fast growth that can be changed by those C-suite members?
I think it comes down to people and process, right? It's just people and process. It's the great leaders that I've noticed, and I'm blessed because I get to sort of pick their brain with certain similar questions, right?
Yeah.
It's it's like constantly I'm always able to ask questions to them, which is intriguing. They focus on people. I would say most of the conversations that I have with them, it's about people and it's about process. Right.
Yeah.
And it's how well you mitigate risk as a third variable to grow your business. And I would say those are the 2 things that they automatically are focused on: the culture, which is the people part of it, and the process part. And you just, I think they call it the 4 Ps, right? You see that in various, but the people, it's every business is about people, Malcolm, like it's you and I are 2 people talking.
Yeah.
Right. It's and I don't think that's ever going to be replaced. So I think it's the people and the processes that are really that drive the very top decisions.
Yeah, I just feel though that we are moving towards needing a different type of leader. We've had the caretaker leader, like Steve Ballmer was at Microsoft there, sitting there. But now we need the agile leader, the one that's going to be pivoting, as you say, or adopting. Because if he doesn't, then it could be bye-bye.
Right, and I think that those folks naturally, right, are sort of pushed out, and and you see that over and over in every society, right, where there's a pull and push and for what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
But it's you've hit that spot on. It's every market we can think of. Just the fact. I don't know the last time you were in a pub, but even a basic experience, right? To walk into a pub and have even those things have changed. And I think if you're somebody that runs a large chain of pubs, you have to think about just the dynamic of the consumer, of the worker, of the location, I mean, there's just, I'm really intrigued how there's so many sectors that will be affected. I'm really just intrigued to see how this is really going to work out.
You've just really upset me, George, and reminded me I haven't been able to get into a pub for 10 weeks now. And hospitality is one of my main sectors, and I was helping pubs grow, microbreweries go, and my gin distillery just won European Gin of the Year. So, none of that was closed down. But I believe, and we've just been announced today, that we'll be back in the pubs in the middle of June.
Okay.
So I better get this edited after we finish before then.
So is that, let me ask you a question now, Malcolm. Is that, I mean, are you envisioning walking into the pub the same way you did in January?
No. They've just been showing different, and we're advising some of our clients on how to socially distance, how to set the place out. And, it's going to be uncomfortable because you can still have to wear masks and that, and,
right.
And somebody following you into the toilet to wipe the seat afterwards. And
and sort of and I think you'll get I've got my favorite pub. It's actually called Churchill's in New York.
Oh, right.
Park in 26. Well, so Park in 26. My favorite, we hear obviously the bartenders, Ruth, she's from Ireland. And I mean, just the whole omnipresence of the experience. I walk in, I really don't have to say anything. I sit down, there's a drink in front of me, and it's just I think some of that intimacy, right? The customer, that customer bond that they have with and that could be the local, cafe or the local restaurant, or
of course, and it doesn't have to be about drinking lots. It's just that atmosphere, isn't it? It's that relaxation, and that's why I think
exactly. And I don't know how I'm going to I guess adapt to that. I don't know. I just I understand the safety factor, but I'm probably not going to walk into a pub with a mask on, right? Just as a customer, right? I'd rather probably stay home and have a bottle of wine at home. I mean, just as a customer, right? But I think there's probably a lot of customers out there with that same sentiment.
I'm just trying to work out how to drink the wine with the mask on. So, look, you're an experienced coach of entrepreneurs. What 3 things in your mind are the bedrock of an entrepreneur who's likely to be successful?
You fail you fail, and you understand that failing is part of the winning.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's
an American culture that we applaud, though, isn't it?
Well, I think you'll see that globally too, right? But I agree. We're very good at, and there's a lot of room to fail here. I mean, there's financially, there's a lot of people that like to take risk, and that, if there's one bank, there's another bank, there's another. I mean, you're able to fail here, right? Which is good. But I think failing and then being able to just know it's part of the process is really, really important. Everyone that I've met that eventually has done well in life, I haven't met anyone that hasn't failed a couple of times, right? I think it teaches you so many lessons about how to structure it the next time. But I would say the failing and knowing how to fail and losing and to be able to win is a really important lesson. The second thing I would say, and just this is a personal thing, I'm a fan of risk, and you have to equate your risk with the time that you're spending, the financial part of it, sometimes the lifestyle that you'd like to have, and there's the risk component. And if you're worried about the risk, then probably being an entrepreneur is not.
Not for you. That's right.
Yeah, it's not right.
Yeah.
And the third thing is, and I see this, I think 95% of most businesses are just, I think they have less than 5 people. I'm probably abusing the statistic there, but most people don't hire people, right? And most people have very few employees.
Yeah.
And I think it's that fear of holding on to the money, not to grow your business. And you get to a point where you need to really just say, you know what, I'm going to put everything on the line. And you do have that pivot point, and you need to grow, right? And that's the third thing I see over and over. And I'll add one more thing, the fourth thing, and this is I see this with and I won't mention, but it's somebody that I do business with, or just somebody if I approach this person with an idea, usually it's a negative reason why it won't work, right?
Yeah.
Or not, or we tried this, before and 7 people told me no. I think the ability to just have a very thick skin to be able to beta test, assumptions.
Yeah.
That's a very big skill set for an entrepreneur.
Pride is often,
Yeah. Well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you better lose your pride very quickly, because but I think you need to be able to beta test things, and just don't assume that because it didn't work 10 times at the 11th to the 20th, it won't work.
I don't know whether you're going to be able to help me on this next question, but we've got a brand called Silverpreneurs, and you don't really qualify yet. It's for people age 50 plus, either starting a business because they want to, or having to, or finding a job. The challenges they face include ageism, digital skills, energy, and new learning. We encourage them to sell their gravitas,
right,
to overcome ageism fears. What else would you say to those people to give them motivation and stimulation to get it going?
So I experienced this on the other side when I started my business, right? I was like a 5-year-old kid, and the clients that I was trying to go after were between 45 and 65, and they would tell me that they couldn't do business with me because I was too young, right? So I had this other problem. I get this question a lot because the typical person that I'm working with is between the age of 45 to 65, right? So I get this question probably 5-6 times a week. I think it's easy to get distracted by the technology, right? It's easy to get distracted by, you don't know how to use Instagram. You don't know how to use LinkedIn, Twitter,
They're just tools.
Exactly. But that base, that common core, sort of base that's worked for literally, 2,000 years of communication and people to people and how to network and giving. And then, before you take, if they just focus on those same skills they've used their whole lives, right? The connection of how to sort of, to strategically think how to solve a problem without the technology. I think they have an advantage over a lot of the younger people that really don't know how to communicate. The first job I ever had, I think I was like, 10 years old or 11 years old. And the way I got that job was I told my dad, said, "Hey, we need to get a job." He said, "Go to the neighbor, knock on his door, tell him you need a job." The neighbor told somebody else who told somebody else. And then six people later, I was working in this, I had a job, right?
We call it LinkedIn today.
Exactly. And that technique, 80% of all executives, by the way, they're, find their next role through 6 degrees of separation, right?
Yeah.
So it's that still works extremely, extremely well. And I can tell you there's a lot of younger people that they think they're going to solve a $200, $300, $400, $1 million problem by sending a text message, by sending an email. You and I know, you pick up the phone, you meet the person, you talk with the person, and that skill set I think it's a skill set that, quite frankly, I think the younger generation, they've never learned that. And I would say, thank you, by the way, for the compliments, the gray hair. Maybe it doesn't show up on camera, but I have enough coming out. So that's a skill set that is invaluable. I mean, that they should use that skill set, and don't worry about the technology part of it. Worry about the people part of it. It's a blessing to have that skill set. A blessing.
Yeah. One of the large UK banks told me that they said, "Look, we messed it up. We teach the young people how to go and get money from a hole in the wall, the ATM machine, yeah?
Right.
But then when they want a loan, we don't teach them how to communicate to the bank manager to ask for a loan, to negotiate it,
Right. Well, I mean, that's the loan example is a great. I mean, 20, 25 years ago, how would you go to get a loan, right? You would talk to your banker. You'd walk in. You would show him a physical business plan.
Yeah.
Right. He would look at it. He would say, "Well, I'm not a fan of this or that." He would explain it to him. He would then say, "Well, let me talk to so and so." He would do a little bit of, and things would happen. And he could call you back and he would call you back and and you could settle it that way. Now everything is so processed, right? That there, by the way, there, I don't know if you know this, but there is a way you can still get a loan for a home without going through the credit score system. You can literally still walk into the bank and do that if you needed to. But the ability to be able to communicate, right, and solve problems the way you and I are talking right now, it's the younger people. They just don't have that. A lot of them don't have. They don't have that as
the
a
communication.
As a core. Yeah.
We do it in our training of pubs and restaurants. We teach the barman how to clean the pumps, to do the bottles, but we don't teach them how to talk to the customers.
Right, and Malcolm, you see this. I mean, you see this at a pub, or you see this at a cafe. I mean, I'm going to take my phone here and show you. If you walk in, you'll see a bunch of 5 or 6 younger university students, and the way they'll all be in a circle, and they'll be like this, right? And that's what they do. And if you see sort of, let's say the both of us are sitting in front of each other, your cell phone or your mobile will be in your pocket, right? Mine will, be in my pocket, right? And right now we're talking. I have mine on airplane mode because I want to focus on us, and not what's going on with the rest of the world. And I think it's you can see it day by day. I mean, even folks walking down the street,
they bump into you, don't they? Going around the supermarket's even worse. Look, you work around the world and must see unfulfilled opportunities that agile entrepreneurs could quickly explore and develop. If you were to encourage CMOs or CEOs, which geographical direction would you steer them in? For example, Mexico is mooted in the UK as a replacement for China, so that you wouldn't have vulnerable supply chains. You know Peru very well.
Exactly.
Is the rest of the South America ready for entrepreneurism, or Africa, or other parts of Asia?
So it's a great question, and I have a home in South America, so I've been there, spent a lot of time there. I think the problem with South America, for example, and most of it is just the infrastructure. First of all, the infrastructure is not really there. You have a lot of times the political instability for some of these places. Yeah. The third problem that I see is, and this is you see this in Peru, for example, all the time. The best there's a talent deficit, right? And if you look at you can even take India and look at the UK. You have some of the world's best doctors in the UK. And a lot of them are folks that weren't born in the UK, right?
That's correct, yeah.
The United States, the UK, and the UK, for example, I think we're very accepting of, we get great talent. The talent comes to us. But I think countries like this, a lot of the countries in South America, they have a talent deficit, right? Where if you're because the money's not there, right? So they'll go to Europe, or they go to the United States to run a research project. Mexico, and I don't know, have you done lots of business in Mexico before, Malcolm?
Yeah, I was in the travel business for many years, so I've been around.
So there's an area in Mexico City. I'm there 5 or 6 times a year, and it's called Polanco in Mexico City. I don't know if it's sort of the posh.
No, I don't know it now. Yeah.
I mean, it's there's so many talented executives in Mexico that understand the global market. That I see that as a great opportunity, and I do like the assumption that maybe things are moving towards to Mexico versus China for the supply chain. The talent, there's so much talent in Mexico, and they understand. There's less. There are cultural differences, but they really understand as a buyer who they're serving.
Right.
It's their. I can tell you this. So we've done a lot of placements in South America as well as Mexico and in other parts of the world. There's a polish and there's a preparedness that the Mexican executive shows up with that is becoming parallel to sort of an American executive or a British executive.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always like that, but I tell you, it's I could see that happening with instead of. I could see the supply chain changing from China to Mexico very easily. It
sounds sensible. The UK wants to sell into the USA post-Brexit. and hope that an early trade deal can be done. Having presented sales and marketing workshops in the USA, I know it's very different there. I know it.
Right.
Yeah. So what 3 tips do UK sales leaders and CEOs need to learn about successfully entering the USA market?
I think there's a form of directness. We're much more direct, and it's less personal. I think it's directness. The personal relationships is really, really important. And I think we've and I've had the just the blessing to live in the UK. But I would say that if you're listening to this and you're about to do business in the United States, you need to get to your end game much quicker, and sort of what you really need, and what is the exchange that we're going to sort of go through.
Yeah.
And I think if we start, I think Americans in general, we start with okay, here's sort of my end game. Here's what I need. And then we sort of work backwards. And I don't know if you agree with Malcolm, but on the other side, I think I would say the sort of the British or the UK, sort of executive, starts in the beginning and sort of develops it to the
he starts with the small talk first and all that.
Exactly. We're a little, I think we're a little more direct, and I wouldn't say I know we're more direct. We've worked with a lot of. I'm working with somebody right now he's been in the United States now for 15 years. He's originally from London, pedigree universities, and worked at some just terrific places in Europe, and he's having a personal dilemma of how do I brag without bragging, right? How do I?
It's British.
Yeah. So I think there's a way to do it if you can get to the end game, and without embellishing the truth, and letting the other party know exactly what you're going after, without sort of there's just less song and dance is probably better with us.
Yeah. Look, I've come to my final question. Before I do that, remember everybody, I put the URL up for McGehrin Group for you to pop along and follow through more about some excellent work George is doing. So finally, George, final question. Yeah. The $1 million question. The $1 million question.
Scared by the question, by the way. Malcolm,
yeah. Where do you think today's leadership coaching needs to change, or does it? Can the traditional way of coaching be successful in this new normal?
And I'm a fan of coaches. I mean, I think that everybody in life, you should have. I call them sort of Team McGehrin, Team Gallagher, right? But there's somebody that I've worked with. I speak to him twice a month for an hour each session, and I've worked with him for years. But there's been just an abundance of coaches that, quite frankly, I don't really know how skilled they are, and I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
It's kind of the model as if you were, if you've lost your job and now I'm a coach, right? And so I think number one, I think you have to distinguish if you're legitimate, you have to distinguish yourself from sort of the imposters. There's so many imposters on the coaching side, but the one thing I like personally about using, for example, the person I'm with, is that we talk about real problems and he drives real results, and then he keeps us accountable. And I think if you're a leadership coach, keeping people accountable and less philosophical. I mean, there's a lot of philosophy with what you could do and should do and habits but I think you really have to. I think if you treat the objectives as real KPIs, and here's exactly what we need to get to, and then measure it later and see if you hit that. I think that's a way to not only charge more money, get better clients, but also just, I think you can reach a lot more people successfully. And also, I mean, there's so many people that they sell this philosophy, or they're regurgitating books that we've all read, without real, true mathematical, benefit, right? And I think the ones that with my coach, every 2 weeks we measure the true. I mean, we have our own KPIs and we measure it. And the good ones can do that.
We've got our own balanced scorecard, which links into the KPIs, but I still go back to Dale Carnegie.
Is he great?
George McGehrin of the McGehrin Group. I have thoroughly enjoyed meeting you, and you've given everybody that's listening and watching there some terrific advice, and hopefully they'll start thinking a little bit more deeper. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Malcolm.